Welcome to the Electric Art Podcast, where we unravel the mysteries of technology and its profound influence on contemporary culture. In today's episode, titled Death of the Composer, AI, Music and Creativity, I'm thrilled to be joined by the deeply imaginative composer, Dr. Robert Laidlow. Renowned for his innovative work that merges advanced technology, scientific collaboration, and live performance, Robert has created groundbreaking compositions such as Silicon for orchestra and AI, and the award-winning piano concerto Warp and Post-Singularity Songs for soprano and electronics. As a fellow in composition at Jesus College, Oxford, and former PRiSM PhD researcher in AI with the BBC Philharmonic, Robert brings unique insights into the evolving role of AI in music and the arts. Join me as we chat about whether the future of music is being shaped by artists or artificial intelligence on the Electric Art Podcast. Hello, Robert. A warm welcome to the Electric Art Podcast. Where do we find you today?
Well, you find me at home. So I've just been away. I've just been in New York and Glasgow and various places. But I live in Chesham, which is sort of between London and Oxford. Both places that I do quite a lot of my artistic work and my teaching work, all that kind of thing. So that's where I live.
Can you tell me about your journey into the world of music and technology? How did it all begin? How did you first become interested in integrating AI into your practice as well?
Yeah, so I've always been pretty interested in music and technology in general. I wasn't really raised, or not really raised, but I wasn't trained as a classical musician to begin with. So I started off as a jazz player, and then when I was in school and sixth form university, I was in various like prog rock bands or jazz bands or punk bands, and I used to play all sorts of odd technologies in those. So I was always really interested in integrating whatever technology I could find, whether it was like an iPad app or a synth or whatever, into my music. And then when I sort of started writing more classical music, I kept this interest going. And the thing about how AI got in particular was that I was really interested in this area and what it might mean creatively. But at the time where I got interested in it, which was about 2018 or so, there weren't really that many projects that were done by regular performing musicians. A lot of the AI projects came from the computer science side, and so they were really interesting computer science wise, but they weren't always that interesting artistically. That wasn't really the point in these projects.
Yep.
And so I started looking at this technology and thinking, well, what could you do with it? What actually are the really interesting artistic results? And that was one side of it. There was also up in Manchester a PhD with an orchestra, the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, who I've worked with a lot. And they were also really interested in this field. They were looking to work with someone for a few years on exploring just these kinds of questions. So I started working with them, and really my interest developed in tandem with using it. So I knew that there was something here that I wanted to do. But I didn't really always know what that was until we tried it out in the studio or whatever. So it's a little bit of both, yeah.
Your work has been described as gigantically imaginative. And just going back to that studio moment, how would you describe your creative process? Where does the inspiration come from? Where's that bridge, that marriage between traditional and tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it comes in a lot of ways and a lot of forms. So, I mean, whether I'm writing music to do with technology or not, I'm always really interested in making interesting structures behind my pieces, interesting forms. So using the way that the material is grouped or the way that it relates to other materials as something that's really important. So rather than just having thinking about music on a surface level, I always start with probably months usually of structural planning. And that's one way that this technology can come in as well. Does it come in when I'm actually planning a structure and disrupt my process there and send me off into a completely new direction, which creates these wonderful new structures which I never would have thought of in the first place? That's definitely one way that this impacts my creative process. Another is that sometimes this technology can create literal new sounds that you've never heard before, or you've never even thought of making before. And that's kind of the other end of the extreme. That really is surface level material. That's what people hear when they hear the piece. That's sort of right in their face. And thinking about how to integrate that into an ensemble, whether to put it at the front of the ensemble so that everyone can hear it, or to put it in the background so that it's kind of supporting the other performers. That's a really interesting question too. And so you have these two poles of structural or surface level material, which is the case always when I'm writing music anyway. And it's a question of, where does AI fit in? What does it contribute, or what does it sort of disrupt or augment wherever you fit it in? And how obvious do you want that to be to the audience as well? How far is this music about people hearing what AI is doing? Or how far is it about them hearing sort of a normal piece in inverted commas, but there's AI as part of it? So that's a question that is, I'm always thinking about. And you mentioned there as well this sort of marriage of traditional and new. And I think that's really important in my work in particular, is how can you leverage these old institutions like orchestras into saying something new, or using something new to say something new.
And with your work, Silicon, obviously a very significant piece of what you've done so far. Could you tell me more about the inspiration behind that particular project, and also not being negative, but also the challenges that have arisen when you've kind of delved into these many layers in the work. And you also mentioned, that the challenges working with a traditional orchestra as well, bringing that into the fold of advanced tech.
Yeah, so Silicon was a really big project. It's about a 45-minute long piece for orchestra and AI of various kinds. And I didn't write it continuously over 3 years, but it took about 3 years from start to finish, and that was sort of interrupted by the pandemic and all sorts of things like that. So the idea of this piece was really to place the orchestra as a relevant vessel for exploring AI, but also to use AI as a vessel for exploring the orchestra, what the point of an orchestra is today, what kind of music it plays and doesn't play. And AI is used in a few different ways, actually, throughout Silicon. It's in 3 movements, and broadly it uses it in 3 different ways. So the first movement uses an AI that writes notes that the players can then interpret. So it was sort of like a conversation. I would write some music, and then it would respond to what I've written, and then I would respond to what it's written. And we were both, me and the AI, both trying to steer this piece in whatever direction that we'd decided. I don't want to anthropomorphize it, but it does make decisions, and so therefore it does decide certain things. And that was really fun. Talking about structures again, that's a really interesting way of structuring a piece, because you can't actually predict what the piece is going to sound like before you start writing it, because you don't know what the AI is going to do. And also it might do several things based on the same prompt as well. It's totally random like that. So that was the first movement. Second movement used an instrument that the synthesizer player in the orchestra was using, that was generating sounds using AI. So whenever he clicked a note, it would make a new sound that was imitating something in the orchestra. So it's kind of like a deep fake instrument. And the last movement used an audio generating AI that was trained on the orchestra. And that was sort of generating new orchestral music at the same time as the physical orchestra was playing. So this was a lot of work, and a lot of this was completely new technology. In fact, especially the second movement, that instrument hadn't been invented when I wrote the piece, and then I sort of went in search of someone who could go and invent it so that they could make this sort of deep fake instrument for me. And I guess what I was interested in doing was showing the relationship between orchestras and AI. I mean, in a way, orchestras have always used new technologies. At some point, a violin was a new technology. At some point, the piano was a new technology. And so it's not really that unusual to fit in maybe AI into this historic context in one sense. But in the other sense, orchestras are almost sort of the antithesis of what AI is doing, because it's a very, very live, a very physical, very sort of almost ceremonial event. Going to see an orchestra, it's like going to see a sort of society of people working together in complete tandem to create sort of one thing. And it's a hugely sort of communal event. And that, I suppose that's not only limited to classical music, but I am a classical musician. And that seems to me quite different to how AI learns from, say, orchestral music, like I did in the third movement. It can only learn from the sound data at the moment. And so it can only produce sound data. And so what we get is like only the surface of what orchestras do, but AI doesn't sort of learn from or understand what's going on under the surface, that physical motion, emotional connections, the history of the pieces that were being played, when they were written, all this kind of thing. And so there's a really interesting contrast between the two there that I wanted to explore in lots of ways. And then there was also this element of just playing things again and again and using old data, if you want to call it that, for new things, which is obviously what AI does. Take old data, make new things out of it. But that's what orchestras do as well. Take old pieces, 200 years old, and you just keep playing them again and again, and you think every time you're saying something new. So yeah, there's a lot of connections there.
I love what you were saying about the human element and then the AI element, at all about the human being the emotion, the almost like the connection, the emotional connection to the music, and then you have AI coming as well. The relationship. How do you feel that relationship over time will progress? What does it mean to be a modern composer with AI very much on the horizon?
Yeah, I do wonder if there's going to be a sort of renaissance of people going to see, highly human music, whatever that means to them. It might mean going to like a basement with four other people and watching a 2 hour long free improv session that's not recorded, or it might mean going to see more amateur groups, non-professionals, people who are really, it's their hobby, or it might mean people taking up these hobbies as well. I think in whatever guise we're going to see it, I think we're going to see more connection with the human elements of music making. Not that they've ever gone away, but once AI can generate, whatever you want on the surface, on the sonic surface, I don't think it's going to replace human music making. I don't think anyone thinks it's going to replace human music making. And so you have to think about what is it that people value about human music making, which isn't really a question we've asked ourselves before. What's been valuable about human music making has always been intertwined with the product, with the CD or the single, or the album, whatever it is. And so we've listened to that and sort of conflated the two. But actually, if we can generate the single with AI, we're going to start realizing that we're missing something. And so I do think that's going to be a really big part of where we go in the next few years. And I think that there are certain, I guess, types of music or genres of music that will benefit from that. I do think that classical music, in terms of concert hall music, is going to be largely unaffected in that sense. I do also think that the same goes for many genres of music that people like to go and see live. At the same time, the kinds of music that people don't see live and are only interested in the product, those are probably going to undergo some pretty industry-wide challenges. I don't want to downplay that. So some types of media music, for example, that's going to be really tough for composers who are in those fields, and as well as for the performers who record that music as well. So yeah, I think, what does it mean to be a modern composer? I don't know. I think every composer has a different answer to this. But for me, it's, I'm really interested in keeping those ideas at the forefront of my mind and thinking about human music making and thinking about what my pieces mean to see live, how this technology is used live, how people have that connection live. Obviously, I love having recordings of my music as well, but they're always written for live situations in whatever way that means.
Oh no, that makes a lot of sense, and I suppose one of the great benefits and positives around technology is also access to music, and in terms of education as well. And do you feel AI will be or open that door into the classical music world that bit wider?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. I mean, AI is access to music education is a huge area in which AI can't necessarily take on the roles of everything. I mean, in this country, we've had funding to music education cut to such a degree over the last 15 years that most schools don't offer music in sixth form anymore. Many don't offer it in GCSE or what are they called GCSEs now? Anyway,
I
age,
think it is. Yeah,
yeah,
I think it still is
year
GCSE.
10 and 11. Anyway, so
Yeah.
and this is, unless this is reversed, it doesn't matter how good your AI tools are, because you're not going to be given a chance to use them unless someone is really, really dedicated at home and wants to learn. But that, frankly, that wouldn't have been me. I got into music because of my school teacher. And if I
Yeah.
hadn't been learning music, I wouldn't be a composer, no matter what the tools are. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of opportunity for AI to help people who are already on that road. I think that's a big part of where this technology might sit in the future. It could sit
Yep.
inside a creative process of someone who's is perhaps not a confident professional composer, but someone who's just starting out. And that's really exciting. I mean, you talk about accessibility as well. I think that's, in terms of the wider usage of that word, I think that's a huge area for AI. It really is. Making accessible instruments, or allowing people who can't perform to be able to perform. I've seen lots of examples of this. I did my PhD at the Royal Northern College of Music, who also have a
Yep.
partnership with Drake Music, who are a charity who work with people with various disabilities to be able to play music, and they're really interested in AI. There's a PhD student at the college at the moment working with AI in that way. I was at a conference in Germany recently, and I saw someone who wasn't able to speak had managed to work with someone to render his voice using AI, and then had created like a rap track, which is his preferred genre of music to listen to. This is really amazing stuff, really, actually, and I think that is so valuable, and something that isn't really talked about very much. Actually, is people who just can't make the kind of music that they might like to at the moment because of the um, affordances of traditional instruments. Suddenly, there's a whole world that might be opened up if that's the direction that this research goes in, which I certainly hope it is.
Techno Utopia, your up and coming project, equally deeply fascinating, and I'd love to know a bit more about that. The soloist playing piano, the incorporating AI instruments as well, which is very new to me, and I really want you to explain what latent spaces is as well.
Sure. This follows on sort of fairly well from what I was just saying, actually, in terms of making new instruments or the ways of accessing music. I mean, in this piece, so I'm writing it for this pianist called Zubin Kanga, but he's to call him a pianist is it's difficult to describe this piece because he is a little bit like me. He's very, very interested in new technologies and using them in his practice. So he plays the piano still a lot, of course, but he also plays all sorts of instruments, new digital instruments, and so on. And so that's how this collaboration came about. We wanted to explore this world together. And in terms of these new instruments, I mean, how to put this? So yeah, okay. So one of the new instruments uses a latent space, as you allude to there, which is a sort of a way of representing a latent space is a multi-dimensional way of representing data. So you put data for an AI, so you don't do it, an AI does this. Well, you could do this actually, but an AI will do it for you quicker. An AI puts data points, in this case, maybe sounds, sounds from an orchestral archive of recordings, in this case. So it takes all these sounds and puts them together, and it puts the ones it understands as being similar to each other in similar spaces in this latent space, and the ones it thinks aren't similar, it puts very far away. So it's created a space of sounds, and then you give it a new input, and it looks at that input and tries to work out where it thinks that input should sit inside that latent space. And then it makes a new orchestral sound, in this case, based on where it thinks it sits. And so you have this this sort of imaginary space that the AI has made, full of sounds. It's like a Pandora's box of sounds, and then you can put whatever you want in, and you get a brand new sound out of it based on the rules and representations that the AI has learned. And so it's kind of a complex one to describe. I'm not very good at describing latent spaces.
No, you said it brilliant. That was
Yeah,
that was great. I
yeah,
love the Pandora's box. Is it sounds like almost like a musical cosmos. It's like a universe of, you don't quite know what's out there,
yeah.
and
I
you don't
think it
know
is a bit like the cosmos. If you imagine the cosmos has this sort of, the cosmos is mostly vacuum, right? So it's mostly
yeah.
nothing. But every point in space has like sort of latent quantum energy. So every point in space can suddenly create a new particle out of nothing. That's physics. Latent spaces are like that as well. You have this whole space, which is mostly, as it were, empty, in inverted commas, until you give the AI an input, and then it suddenly creates something out of this empty space. And we're really interested in this for loads of reasons. I mean, first of all, it sounds cool. It sounds great. Like it sounds really, really good. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is there are loads of ways to access this latent space. So as I said earlier, this space it exists in lots of dimensions. It may be, I think this one I'm going to use has 17 dimensions, and they're not things that you and I would normally understand. So if you and I were making a latent space, our dimensions, how we categorize the sound, might be things like how loud is the sound, how much violin is in the sound, what note is the sound, all this type of thing. That's not really how an AI categorizes them. It does much more statistical, mathematical things that don't really make sense to us, which is kind of fun. And so you have this question of actually the way that we pass information to this space is really important. And I can't pass on 17 dimensions at once. So we need to pass on a small amount of information that we then transform into like a set of 17 coordinates that then the AI interprets. So there's loads of creative questions in here about how we get that information. Actually, in this case, we're going to get it from like motion sensors. So he's going to be making gestures in space with his arms and legs and head and things, and that's going to turn itself into data, which is then going to access the space. So there's a question of how do we access it? What sounds does it make? What do we train it on? And how can he practice with it? He's a musician. He's got to practice this instrument, and we've got to make something that he can more or less replicate every time he plays this piece, which is difficult because an AI is fundamentally probabilistic, and so it won't make the same sound every time. So there's all sorts of really interesting creative questions here that we're jumping into.
And then going from latent spaces to birds with your work TUI, which pretty much explores the relationship between the sound of this bird and AI. Just for context, for people listening, is that this bird is native to New Zealand. It's very boisterous. It's a beautiful. Um, and I love the way you reflect on nature and pairing it with AI as well. What drew you to the bird? What drew you to the sound? Is it from a personal experience, or just the love of the sound, or nature?
Yeah,
Take your
so
time.
this piece, TUI, this was the one that was premiered last week in New York. So you're really hot off the press here. So I've been thinking about this relationship between songbirds and AI for a little while now, actually. So this earlier piece, Silicon, that we were talking about, my initial idea was to end this piece with a sort of menagerie of bird song that was partly real and partly AI generated. But I didn't do that in that piece. But I wanted to come back to it. So I'm interested in this relationship for lots of reasons. So the tui is an imitative songbird, so it learns from its environment. I know about the tui because my wife's from New Zealand and we spent a lot of time in New Zealand. And I've heard these birds, and I think there's a really interesting relationship between imitative songbirds in particular and generative AI, because they both learn from their surroundings and they both incorporate the sounds that they've learned into what they output, whether that's their generations or their songs. But they don't understand the context of what they've learned. They don't know what it signifies. It's purely there based on acoustic properties. And that's really interesting that we have this actual analog to generative AI in nature, and we've got lots of imitative songbirds that do this. The TUI itself, its song already sounds a bit like a computer, so that's quite fun. It sort of sounds like a sort of modem being set on fire. So it's quite an amazing sound, and it's not a perfect imitator. It's not like the Australian lyrebird, which can imitate something really, really well, so it sounds exactly like the original. TUI's imitations are always filtered through this sort of strange modem-like voice that it's got, and that's a bit like generative AI as well. Because you can often hear when something is generated by AI, even if it's trying to be in the style of something else. There are often these little fingerprint telltales, which are super interesting, these artifacts. So that was one reason. And I guess a more philosophical reason is I'm wondering, what is the way that we should be listening to AI-generated music as it becomes more prevalent? And I think the way that we talk about it is as if we should be listening to it like music by human composers. And I'm not sure that that's true. And I think that's possibly the cause of a lot of friction with AI generated music at the moment. I mean, there are lots of economic and ethical things to do with training AIs to make music and how you train it and so on and so forth. But when it comes to actually just how to listen to it, I wonder if we might have more luck listening to AI generated music in the way that we listen to song by songbirds. Because we don't impart the same kind of values on songbird song, and yet we do enjoy it for what it is. Of course, songbirds come from nature, and AI is human made, but I think there's something there. So that was where that sort of piece came from. And in the piece, it explores this TUI song in lots and lots of different ways, which was really fun to work with the musicians. They've all got to imitate each other, like the bird imitates its surroundings, and all sorts of imitation and fun technology going on in the piece.
And there's this other work I've been listening to called Post-Singularity Songs, which I've delved into, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is about where AI surpasses human intelligence. It's a very topical theme where AI, when it hit the mainstream last year. And this is where, the ambition is to create this framework for an invented, almost like a future world. And what I really loved, what really opened my eyes and ears, was at the beginning with this, audio generated model that was trained on the singer's voice as well. And hearing her say those words at the beginning was really pulled me in. So I'm very keen to understand a little bit more about the work, but also about how you ensure that the human element remains very strong in a composition that does rely quite heavily on AI. Getting that balance.
Yeah, you've pretty much got it right there. So this piece is the text. So this is a piece for singer and electronics, and the electronics part coming through the speakers use a lot of AI. And the text is not really written by AI, although some of it is written by AI. But the ideas, the world building for the world in which this story is set, that all comes from AI. And that came from a lot of conversations I had with various large language models and some that I trained myself. So really, you can imagine the AI in this piece as being much more of a collaborator, if you want to use that word, than it has been in my previous work, where it's mostly been a sort of a tool for me to achieve whatever sonic result I wanted. And so it came up with all these ideas, and that was quite collaborative. But also what was very collaborative was my work with the singer. And you're sort of asking where the humanness sits in this music. I mean, in a sense, I've written all the notes, so there's no sort of question about whether that's human or AI generated in terms of the musical content. But I think the much more human aspect and the much more interesting aspect was when Stephanie, who's the singer, when Stephanie and I were sitting down to work on this piece and thinking, well, this part here, this part, this creation myth that this AI has come up with, that we've adapted, what does it mean? What does this character represent? Or what could they represent in this world? And, I don't have the answers to that. There aren't any answers. It's random. It's random noise that the AI has generated. But it's really meaningful, actually, for Stephanie and I to then interpret it in a completely new way, actually. So we took it quite seriously at the same time as being quite aware that we could make quite big judgments on the material because no one was going to contradict us. So there was this sort of, you don't really get that when you work with a human. If we'd worked with a human storyteller on this, then we wouldn't have felt so confident to put our stamp on it so heavily. And yet at the same time, we were also, taking very seriously what the elements of this world were. So I think that was a lot of where the humanness came from, was in that collaboration. And this piece is still, it's been performed 3 times, and we're going to perform it a few more times over the next year or two. And every time we're changing it, and we're hoping to add more collaborators. So for the next one, we're looking at involving a visual artist whose work also uses AI to adapt to the sounds that are being sung in the room at the time, and that's projected. We're also looking at working with some dancers as well, if we can find the funding for that. And so this is a big nexus for bringing in human collaboration focused on this non-human thing, this world.
What a brilliant way to add to it. They're bringing in dancers, visualizations as well, so it becomes this multi-sensory experience, for the for the listener, for the viewer.
Yeah, and I've not worked with dancers before, and I think one of the things with AI is that it is actually a big place for interdisciplinary work. It sort of attracts that by its very nature. I mean, it itself is interdisciplinary. So all the algorithms that generate music or text or images, whatever you want, they actually are all fundamentally architecturally the same. And it's just about what kind of data you give it and how you treat that data. So AI itself is agnostic towards art form, which is pretty interesting to begin with. But that does mean that people in other art forms who are interested in AI, you have this instant level of connection that you find it very easy to work with people, and you find the same sort of questions coming up and the same responses, the same artifacts. It's quite fascinating.
The subject of connection comes up quite a bit. I was chatting to Marshmallow Laser Feast earlier this week, and they were talking about very similar approach to what you're talking about, how they work with collaborators like scientists, poets, technologists, musicians, and how that pulls into the piece. So you have this multi-sensory experience, and it kind of brings, really jumps out at you the fact that, the role of technology is going in a direction to help, to boost the experience of the arts, which is really exciting. There's one question that kind of came up while you were talking about the role of authorship. You mentioned that, but also about creative ownership as well, as part of the process. How do you address, or have you addressed, like, the ethical concerns that, especially in the music industry, even this week's quite a bit of news about the originality of the work, about creative ownership. How do you think composers feel about this, and people in the industry, but also how do you feel the listener, the public, feel about this as well?
Yeah, so creative ownership and authorship, has always been a really big concern. I mean, not just in my work, but actually ever since I started working with AI, and that was a few years ago now. It was basically one of the first things that people were asking about, even before this explosion that's happened recently in terms of the capabilities of models. It's a really interesting question because lots of music is not, and indeed films as well, and all sorts of art are actually already not single authored, and yet they sort of pretend that they are. So you see, like a soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, for example. Hans Zimmer didn't write that. He maybe had an overall curatorial idea, and there are lots of these sort of unnamed people working beneath him. So all that to say, there are already lots of issues in terms of assigning authorship in the music industry. But even before we get into AI, which is going to complicate these things much further. In my projects, I've always been really, really careful to attribute who is doing what, and particularly when I'm working with other people's data, is to have a really robust agreement with them about where I can use this data, where I can't, So, for example, this BBC project earlier, I used their archives. I trained my AI on their archive, and that's all their recordings. That was like 40 years of BBC orchestra recordings. But that was just for this one project. And I think a lot of the issues that people have are in when people are training their AI on things that people haven't agreed to. So when we put our music on the internet, we didn't agree to let OpenAI or Google train their algorithms on our music. And we've just seen that Google has released a new model that's always about to release a new music model based on YouTube, which I'm not sure that anyone who uploaded their music to YouTube agreed that was what they wanted. So I think for me, those ethical issues come in terms of where are you getting your data? Have you got permission to use that data? And what are you going to generate with that data as well? And so, yeah, it varies from project to project. It's a really, really big question. But I mean, I think those are the questions that people need to be asking rather than, is this music AI generated? I'm not sure people are really going to care about that too much in certain industries, at least, in certain genres. People are going to be interested in how artists are using AI, and they're probably not necessarily, once this has all died down in terms of it being in the media so much, I think people are going to be much more interested in how people are using AI generated material. It's going to become something that's part of the language.
Yeah, I was just on that within your industry as well. Are you, when you meet up with your collaborators, your family and friends within the industry, are you welcome? Are you embraced, or is it quite a fiery topic around the role of technology within classical music as well?
Yeah, there's a little bit of both. I mean, I was a classical composer before I started using AI, although I wasn't, I was only doing my masters. So I wasn't at all a known composer. But people do know that I was first interested in writing music normally, as it were, before I was interested in this technology. So I think that does help. There is a lot of suspicion. There can be a lot of suspicion, and a lot of suspicion comes from some misunderstandings, maybe, about what people are trying to do with this technology, but also some genuine concerns. I mean, generally, people are interested in how technology is used. I think the most frustrating thing is the other way around, actually, when people, and particularly when my work is sort of advertised or whatever it is, they'll actually erase me, which has happened several times, and it's very frustrating, to be honest with you. I mean, in the classical music, it's a difficult one to answer because I think a lot of people who really hate my work probably just don't speak to me or engage with me at all. And that's probably quite likely, that there probably are lots of people out there who don't want to engage with what I'm doing for whatever reason. I do talk to a few people who almost sort of deliberately misunderstand what I and other people like me are doing because they want to be frustrated about this technology and they want to take it out on someone. And I sort of get that frustration if you're really worried about this technology and you really do think it's going to replace all musicians, because that's kind of the narrative that we're given, then I do get that frustration. But it's that's not what I'm interested in at all. If anything, I'm interested in giving musicians more tools to survive in the modern world, or at least writing music that uses those tools in a way that you can use.
I think tools is the right word there as well. No, the context behind asking that question is just like when you hear of artists that are breaking creative barriers, like whether it was Turner when he presented his works to the Royal Academy for the first time, or Jackson Pollock with abstract expressionism. There's this kind of slight pushback. His fear of change, his fear of moving forward.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there are certainly. I'll put it this way. I mean, there's like a list of institutions or ensembles or festivals or whatever it is who might be interested in my work. And I think that therefore the people who aren't on that list I'm not saying they're pushing back, but some of them will be pushing back actually, but some of them will just be not interested at the moment. And so, yeah, there is that a little bit. But there's also to be fair, it's difficult to know how to engage with this technology as well. You might be really, really interested as a composer or as a whatever, as a string quartet, as a festival, as a concert hall, whatever it is. You might be interested in this technology, but you don't actually know necessarily how to convert that interest into an event or a piece or an experience that an audience member is going to come and pay for and enjoy. That's a big leap at the moment. We're all talking about this technology, but when it comes to actually doing something with it, you still need quite a lot of specialist expertise, and people in the arts aren't all, that's not their world necessarily. They don't know people with high levels of technical expertise. They know people with high levels of expertise on instruments or making a film, or whatever it is that their job has been for the last 20, 30 years. And it's going to take time for that bridge to be made, so that people who do want to engage with technology actually can, in a way that makes sense for their organization or business or event, whatever it is.
And you're seeing some of these big institutions start to catch up. Like, I think the Tate have got their first big retrospective about the history of computer art coming up at the end of the year. And I was talking a couple of weeks back to Sam King, who used to work at the Royal Opera House and brought in immersive experiences there. And the Royal Shakespeare Company have obviously done some fantastic work over the last 5 to 10 years. Just sticking with the theme of collaborators, who is that dream collaborator? What is that dream project that's in the distance if money was no object? It doesn't have to be a musician. It could be from any other industry that crosses into your dream.
Yeah, there's quite a few of these, really. Let me try and maybe narrow it down a little bit. So a dream collaboration will be a big project that works across multiple disciplines for me. I mean, I love writing big projects. All my projects are big. They're all mostly, at least, more long pieces that take a long time to write, that use really new ideas. And so I'm really interested in doing I hesitate to call it an opera, but a big piece of music theatre, working with a poet or a playwright that's interested in this field, and a director or a visual artist as well. I think there's, I'm very slowly working on this, but very, very slowly. I'm just canvassing ideas and trying to find people who might want to work together, because I think this goes back to the question about this technology being a sort of interdisciplinary bridge. I think there's something quite amazing about responding to or bouncing off or rejecting the same technology across many disciplines in a narrative format. I've written a lot of abstract music, but I'm interested in how this could be done telling a story. That's one project I would absolutely love to do. Another similar, I'd love to work with someone like Wayne McGregor, the choreographer. He uses lots of technology, but also dance is so involved, obviously, with what a human body is and what it can be. I think that's a wonderful sort of perfect foil for a lot of the conversations around this technology. So some kind of dramatic music thing or big choreographed piece, I think would be really exciting.
Oh, that sounds absolutely tremendous. That sounds brilliant. The last question I've got here is just about the like a younger generation of musicians, composers who are interested in incorporating technology into their work, and what advice would you give them?
Well, I think some of the advice comes from, what do you want to use this for? Because lots of this technology is billed as being able to create things, sure, so come up with new ideas. But actually, one of the most interesting ways that I use this technology is to disrupt ideas. So not to create them, but to sort of derail what I'm doing, to get me off my beaten track, out of a rut, or just to point my artistic sensibilities in a slightly different direction so I can go somewhere new. So I think this idea of disruption, how can you use this technology to disrupt what you would normally do? Maybe that's not talked about very much at the moment, but I think that's going to be super important in the future, especially for people who are using the technology, who aren't students anymore, who want to use it more professionally. In terms of if you are like a student or just starting out, I think just try lots of different algorithms out, because people talk about AI generated music as if it's one thing, but it totally isn't. So if you take the same data, just one piece of music, for example, and train it on 4 different audio generating algorithms, you're going to get 4 completely different kinds of outputs from the same data. And that's really interesting. What do you like the most? What do you not like? Kind of interrogate that, let alone if you train like a music generating one, so one that generates sheet music rather than sounds. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can use different algorithms with the same data. So AI generating music is definitely not all one thing, and it's really fun and interesting to explore these different sort of personalities, if you like.
Oh, there's such deeply fascinating words there. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
Thank you for having
loved
me.
talking to you, and so a big thanks for me. Thank you, Rob.
Great, thanks.
So that was Dr. Robert Laidlow on music, creativity, and AI, and I very much look forward to seeing how his work evolves visually with sound, dance, and technology. So join me again soon on the Electric Art Podcast.